Now let's take a look at the topic of passive insufficiency. Passive insufficiency is different because this is a stretching of a true joint muscle. When we discussed active insufficiency, we were looking that when you take the muscle through all of its actions, it will become weakened due to a shortened position. However, passive insufficiency is when you stretch a muscle over all the joints that it acts upon. It will cause a limitation of motion at the most distal or secondary segment that you move. For example, let's take a look at our patient lying in prone. When the patient is in prone, their hip is extended and their knee is flexed. When the hip is extended and knee is flexed, this is a stretching position for the rectus femoris, as it's the opposite of its action. Thus, the patient will have difficulty achieving complete knee flexion in this position if the rectus femoris is tight. You can see this runner stretch also on the left side. In this case, the patient has no problem achieving knee flexion or bringing their heel to their bottom. However, you can see that their knee is slightly forward and the hip is slightly flexed. Because they've taken up the space or the stretch with their knee flexion, this caused a limitation in their hip extension. Now, let's take a look at passive insufficiency of the hamstring. The hamstring extends the hip and flexes the knee. To stretch the hamstring, we must do the opposing motions. The opposing motions are flex the hip and extend the knee. This could be done in different positions, such as a patient laying down and us flexing the hip to 90 degrees and then extending the knee, or our patient sitting upright and we have the knees extended and trying to flex the hips while reaching for the toes. In both of these positions, we will cause an overstretching of the muscle. Thus, the secondary position that we take will have a limitation of the range of motion. When we're reaching for our toes, our knees have already taken up the stretch by being extended. Thus, if the hamstrings are tight, we will have a limitation in the hip flexion range. However, if we are laying down on our back and we flex our hip to 90, we take up the stretch through the hip and may have a limitation of knee in extension.